Welcome to the Profitable Home Services Podcast. I'm your host, Diane Gardner, and I'd like to welcome you to another action-packed episode. Our guest today is Tersh Blissett from Service Business Mastery Podcast and Service Emperor. Let me tell you a little bit about Tersh. Tersh is a host and producer of the Service Business Mastery Podcast. He's dedicated to giving back to the industry and was named Top 40 Under 40 The News HVAC-R for his exceptional influence. Tersh has created an innovative brand as the owner and COO of Service Emperor, Savannah and the Coastal Empire's leader in providing superior customer satisfaction while providing HVAC and refrigeration, providing integrity first, service before sell, and excellence in all he does comes naturally since Tersh is a veteran of the 165th Tactical Air Control Party of the Georgia Air National Guard. Not only has he served our country, but he is devoted to serving our community. Tersh has the distinguished honor as the president of the Small Business Chamber of Savannah. He is also privileged to be a board member of Savannah Buy Local and on the executive board of the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society of the Low Country. Tersh is the founder, host, and producer of the Shop Small SAV podcast, where he assists in highlighting local small businesses. Additionally, he is also involved in a multitude of volunteer work in the Savannah area. Tersh, welcome to the program. I'm so glad you were able to join us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. That was a mouthful.
That was. It's like, wow, who wrote that bio?
Definitely not me. Yeah, that's a lot of stuff. I forget that we do that. So oftentimes we stay busy as business owners, but then I don't know. It's a natural calling to do some philanthropy as well. But you can also get bogged down in that as well. It's a very fine line of giving of yourself.
A giving and then knowing when to say no, thank you.
Yeah, that's when my business grew the most, was whenever I learned to say no and just say, nope, can't do it. One of the biggest things that I did was created a schedule, a very strict schedule. So on Mondays and Fridays, I work on the business, not in the business. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I work in the business and not on it. And on Wednesdays, I podcast. So then if somebody asked me to go to a networking event on a Wednesday, no, can't do it. Or if they're asking me to do something in the business on working in the business on a Tuesday or Thursday, it's like, nope, sorry, I can't do it. And so it makes it so that you can say no without having any kind of FOMO or regret for saying no.
I love that concept. I have a similar type concept in here where Mondays I have 3 different church clients that I work on. They take pretty much my whole day. Mm-hmm. Tuesday and Wednesday, we're doing client interviews or meetings, podcast interviews, that type of stuff. Thursday's a quiet work day and Friday's a quiet work day. And so I guard those carefully so that they don't get infringed on. Otherwise, at the end of the week, what have you done? You've run around and put out fires.
Busy work all week.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I love the fact that great minds are thinking alike here.
Right.
So tell me a little bit about Service Emperor. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about what you're doing over there.
Well, Service Emperor is it actually started because of the podcast, because I also own another company called TriStar. And we started TriStar in 2014, a business partner of mine and myself. We started because he had a construction company and did a lot of turns and stuff on long-term rental properties, but he didn't have anybody to do air conditioning side of things. So he would go in, basically replace the carpet, repaint the whole apartment and do all this plumbing work, but he never had anybody do AC. So we came in, partnered up and created TriStar to do plumbing, HVAC, and electrical. And that was in 2014. In 2017, I started the Service Business Mastery podcast. And I talked a lot about TriStar on that podcast and how we were growing between 90 and 120% year over year.
Wow.
And a lot of our listeners were asking, how'd you do that? And how did you start a business? Can you show me or tell me how to do it? And I said, you know what? I'm glutton for punishment. So I'm going to start another business. And I actually purchased a failing business and worked out the kinks in that business and allowed the listeners to kind of follow along with that process. And so I did that in the end of 2018, beginning of 2019. Service Emperor came to fruition in 2020. And that was a great year, basically, to start a business because everything changed in 2020 and everyone was locked down. But we worked through it all, and we were growing, and we've been growing. And it's a 100% paperless and 100% remote business. And we were doing remote stuff before we had to go remote. And so we actually had a lot of people calling and asking us, how do you run your service business completely remote? And so we did a lot of, in 2020, we spent a ton of time teaching others how to operate remotely. And so 2021, we grew 600% between 20 and 2021, which is easy to do whenever you're going from really small to a medium-sized business, or a larger, small business. Then 2021 to 2022, our growth was a little smaller. It's just 100%. But this year we're on target to do right at another 100% growth. So
and
we
you
shall
say
see.
that like 100%. Oh, just 100%. How
Well,
many people out there would love to grow 100%?
when you
2
grow
years in a row.
680%, then the next year it's 100%. It's like, not as great. But I focused a lot on the podcast this past year. And so I knew that attention being taken away from wherever your attention is, that's where your growth is going to be. And so the podcast grew tremendously, but the service business, Service Emperor, did not grow quite as much as I had originally planned to do. And I did a lot of learning from delegation by abdication versus, delegating, teaching people exactly how to do things the proper way, and delegating, that way instead. So I learned from some mistakes, and we're working through it. And this summer, if it could ever get hot, I'd be thankful for that. I mean, it's just now getting into the 90s, and we typically would be in the upper 90s in April. So
you're wanting that warm weather to come hit down
I'd
there.
like for it to, that's for sure.
Well, as we're recording this here in northern Idaho, our high today is 53.
Yeah,
That's not normal for
that's
June.
wild. Yeah. In June, I mean, we would be sweltering with high humidity and everything else, and it's not happening here. So
that does take an effect on a business, an HVAC business.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, talk to me a little bit about this automation thing. That's really cool that you guys were ahead of the game when everybody else was scrambling to figure out how to do it. You already had it figured out. So how does a home service business run fully automated?
Well, so there's a lot of if this then that type scenarios. Whenever one thing happens, it triggers something else to happen. As soon as a service call is completed, it triggers to send out an email and text message thread, and our campaign, and just requesting reviews, requesting referrals, and those types of things. And then as soon as that happens, as soon as a referral comes in, it automatically notifies our team that a review came in. It's automatically set up through AI to respond to the reviews. So the reviews are respond to instantly, which Google likes to see how fast you respond to Google's reviews. So they're responded instantly, and it's very human-like responses that are done there. And everything from, and then we have 365 days of follow-up with a client. So if we offer an estimate and it doesn't close, there's 365 days of follow-up that's created, and it's automatic. So it's through either Zapier or if this then that. Some of it's through our CRMs, and basically we're just not bombarding people and annoying them, but just, hey, I just want to check on you, check in with you. We have some things that are sent like every day for the first week, and then it skips a couple of days, and then the next week it'll just send one notification, send one email the following week. Might go a week or so without talking to someone and then send out a text message, follow up, and so those types of things really just um, re-engages the clients after they haven't talked to anybody for 6 months or so. They're like, oh yeah, we still need to do X, Y, and Z repair, and we'd like to go ahead and get that scheduled and booked. Otherwise, we all talk about spending all this money on marketing and PPC and Google Leads and LSA, but a lot of times we forget about the clients that we already have, and we got to plug those holes at that in the bottom of that bucket that's leaking out. And that's one of the ways to do it. And we have other campaigns and funnels that are set up through some vendors of ours that where they are just re-engaging clients all the time. It's just a client re-engagement every 6 months. They'll reach out to all the clients that haven't done business with us just to say, hey, would you do business with us again? And if so, the first thing they're going to ask for is a review. And then afterwards, they're going to try and get them to set up a service call or a maintenance of some sort.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I think of how many times does somebody follow up once or twice, and if you're really lucky, a third time.
Right.
And then that's it. They're off doing the next thing. And I know I'm guilty of it.
Mm-hmm.
I'll follow up, but it's not my system isn't automated like yours, so it's a little more sporadic.
It's very much. I personally feel like I might be annoying people if I follow up too much, but there's so many times when someone's like, "Thank you for following up with us again. I know that we haven't followed through. We haven't said yes to anything. We haven't committed to it, but it's just because we're so busy. But we really wanted to do it, but we always forget. And the fact that you kept following up with us in a very friendly way and not a pushy way, it just reminded us that we needed to do it, and that's why we did it. And so there's so many times as a business owner where I will get a text message and I'll say, yes, let's do that. But then I say that in my mind, but I don't actually do it or respond to someone. And then I'll tell my wife, Julie, like, oh, so-and-so, like the Ford dealership, sent a message saying we need to get oil changed. And then I don't think anything else about it. But then about a week or two later, they send another text message. And then at that moment, I'm like, oh, yes, I forgot. I was supposed to respond last time. I forgot. I'm going to respond immediately this time. And so it's kind of, that's the thought process that I have whenever I'm making out those campaigns with people. And I also am very deliberate not to do it at the exact same time every single time too. So I'll do it like 1 day and 2 hours later, or 1 day and an hour and 4 minutes later. That way it doesn't feel automated either. Whenever you receive the message, if it's at 5:00 p.m. every single time you get the message, then they're like, oh yes, they have it set up on some sort of automation to do this.
And then that takes out the human element of it in their
Exactly.
mind.
Yep.
Because I know people are looking for that relationship piece, and if they can build a relationship with you and not feel sold, or not feel like you dumped it in an automation CRM and it's just humming away in the background for you.
Exactly. And the biggest thing for that is make sure that you either one, respond immediately whenever they respond, or you have some sort of automation or AI built in to that so that it will respond correctly, not just with a generic response, but it responds correctly to their question or whatever they reply to your message. And we have a couple of automations built out where it can learn through like a program called Chat GPT. It can respond pretty well. And then once it can't respond anymore, then it notifies you, hey, look, I can't respond anymore. You need to take this over as a human. And at that point, we're probably watching it anyways, just to make sure that chat doesn't say something real goofy, because sometimes it will go wild. And so you have to be very careful with that. We can't 100% hand off automation or conversations to AI at this moment, but it's pretty solid conversations. There are some things that get technical that it's very confused about, but as long as it's very generic conversations, AI can handle most all of that. And what that also does is we have done, I don't want to say completely done away with 2 positions in the office, but I pretty much done away with 2 positions in the office just by creating this automation and using AI to do it. Not, and I don't want to say AI is doing away with office positions. It's the automation part of it. And so I don't have to rely on someone forgetting to do X, Y, and Z, not following a step, because these steps are built in. Like, you can't do the next step until the first step's completed. So there's no skipping steps with AI or automation. There's no bouncing around and doing the things that you're most comfortable doing. It does what it's supposed to do without any, feedback or lip or anything like that. So it's, for me, I'm the type of leader that I ask for something to be completed, and then I don't want to hear back unless you have a problem or it's completed. And so, like, I don't need to be constantly, I'm at this point in the project, I'm at that point in the project. I don't need to hear all that stuff. I just need to say, do X, Y, and Z, and then this is the date that it needs to be done. And then you come back to me and say, it's that date and it's done. Like, that's the type of person that I am when it comes to that kind of delegation. And that can be to a fault too. Like I said, I've delegated to by abdication before, and I've learned that just delegating and telling someone to do something without knowing whether or not they know what they're doing, that's a problem. And I've done that. And especially because I come across as such a stern person sometimes, even though I don't mean to at all. I'm if somebody asked me 1,000 questions, I'd give 1,000 answers. But sometimes I just come across as that person where I'm just I don't know if there's a military in my background or what. But I've had people after the fact say, look, I just didn't have a clue what to do. And here it is past the deadline and we're not even started with the project yet. And so I'm like, man, I just screwed up on that. Like, I should have truly made sure that you understand how to do X, Y, and Z before I told you to do X, Y, and Z. And now I make it a point that, like, I want you to ask me questions. And so now there's a very much a teach and then repeat, teach back to me to make sure that you understand the whole process on what we're doing. But the thing about automation and having AI is you don't have to do some of those steps. And so with my personality naturally being like, get X, Y, and Z done, AI will tell you immediately, I don't know how to do X, Y, and Z. So then you're just like, okay, well, this is how you do it. And so it takes a lot of those steps out of the process for me. But there's also the human element that'll never be taken out, that you have to watch it, and you have to watch those chats and be ready to engage with the client via, whether it's chat, text message, email, or picking up a phone call and calling someone.
I'm guessing that as you develop this automation, it's really forced you to solidify your processes and your systems and your tools and all the things that you use, because it's so easy to, quote, delegate something to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And we call that just kind of passing it off in the hallway type delegation, a pass by, a drive by, a run by, whatever you want to call it. Here, hand this off to somebody. We keep on going as a business owner. We've got 13 other things in our head.
Oh, yeah.
And they're looking like, what just happened?
Mm-hmm.
Because we did that to them. So becoming automated, I bet, has really forced you to stop and fill in those missing pieces.
It does. So Ari Meisel is a mentor of mine. He's written several books based on automation, and one of the things that he has told me to do, and it's very powerful process, whenever you're creating a delegation. So there's 6 different levels of delegation, whereas, and I won't go into detail with them, but they range from me being included in all of the steps to the top level of, here's what I want you to do, here's my credit card, just come back to me when it's done, type things. So there's different levels with it. But one of the things, whenever you're creating a process in general, automation requires you to do that, and delegation requires you to create bulletproof processes. And the best way to do that, and I've found this to be so true, is have someone write the process out of the task that they're performing, write out the whole process. And then you can do it over like Loom where like it's a screen recording platform, and you can screen record everything, and then you send that off to a VA to have transcribed, so that each one of those steps that that person gave has created a step, and it's written out like bullet points. Then you hand that process to another person that's never done it, and then you see where that person gets stuck. They're going to get stuck somewhere because you've skipped steps somewhere in their process. Then you give it back to that original person and say, hey, they got stuck on this step, go back through. And then you go through this, and it usually takes, on average, when you first do it, between 10 and 12 different people of doing that before you actually get the full process completely ironed out. And you don't realize the little things, like you'll say, as soon as you've done this step, hand it off to Susie in accounting. Well, Susie in accounting doesn't work here anymore, so I don't know who to hand it off to. So you don't hand it off to Susie in accounting, you hand it off to the bookkeeper, or you hand it off to this person, and you take the names out of everything. And there's a lot of things that you do every day that you don't realize you're doing these steps. Like, click on this link to go over to this area. What's this new tab you have open? Like, I don't even know what platform you're on now. And so there's little things that you do so often that you don't realize you're doing them. You don't realize that you've moved from Teams over to Slack, and now you're talking to people inside of some group chat, Google Chats or whatever. You've moved all over the place. And if you're not very conscious of each one of those steps, then you give it to someone who's never done it before, and they're completely lost. So it makes you very aware of all the different steps you do in the process. And it really can take your processes and take them to a whole different level, as long as you're doing it correctly like that.
When I was working on that in my own office, we had the mom test. We would bring my mom in, who knows nothing about accounting, bookkeeping, tax, anything like that. And if mom could get through the process, we knew we had it nailed, because we would have gone through everybody else in the office. Okay, time to bring mom in. We would call my mom in for an afternoon. It's like, okay, here we go. I want you to try these. So she'd go, okay. She'd sit there and try them. But it was amazing, though, when you get to somebody at her level who doesn't work in your environment day in and day out, how many steps we still had missed.
Right.
Because we all can fill in the blanks.
Exactly.
So it had to pass the mom test.
That's amazing. I love that. And that's the thing about it. Like, I could bring in my mom, and she's great with computers, but does not know anything about the business side of anything. Like, business, you can throw it right out the window. She doesn't want to know anything about it. So I think that's what I'm going to do in the future, is have my mom come in and do the mom test for sure.
When you think you've got it complete, bring mom in.
Yep.
If mom can figure it out, you've done a good job. Until that point, there's still work to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I remember her marking something up in red, because we'd have it all written out for her, because she was pretty kind of old fashioned on stuff. So we'd have it all written out, and we'd be so marked up in red where she got lost here, she couldn't do this. And it was so eye-opening for us that we didn't get detailed enough.
Yeah.
So then we go back and we'd try it again. A couple weeks later, we'd bring her back in. Okay, mom, we're going to try this again.
That's funny. I'm a detail-oriented person, but I don't write down like minute details. I leave a lot to fill in the blanks. And there are certain times where I'm like, if I don't give a person leniency, then like I feel like we need to give each person a little bit of their personality in the process. But the problem with that is that there are times where I give too much leniency. So it's like, I have, and the reason that I know that I've done this is because we went through a period where we had like 4 different CSRs in the matter of a year. And the first CSR was a great CSR. I made him leave because his dream job was to run a radio broadcasting studio, and he got the opportunity to run 3 of them. And he didn't want to leave us because he loved working with us. But I told him, I said, if you didn't take this job, I'm going to fire you, because that's your dream job. And since then, we talk all the time. I love him to death. He's actually the announcer full time now for the Savannah Bananas baseball team.
Oh, wow.
And so, yeah, and I talked to him, and I love Mark to death. But he said, I wouldn't have quit if you hadn't fired me or threatened to fire me. And but then we went through, 3 different CSRs after that for about a period of a year. And I realized that I was giving them way too much leniency. Like, this is the script that we want you to say, but I want you to put it in your own words. And then it just resulted in massive amounts of confusion and inconsistencies from the service technician side of things to client experiences. We wanted consistency with client experience, but we weren't getting it because the CSRs were telling people different things. And so I realized that you can put your little bit of a spin on it, but we have to make sure that these points are all hit. And so I really had to kind of narrow in their creativity a little bit, which is tough for me, because if someone's like a super creative person, I don't want to hinder their creativity. But at the same time, it became a massive frustration for the technicians, because every time they went on a call, they had to listen to the voice, or to the conversation between the CSR and the client, to understand what they were going to do on this call, because it wasn't going to be the same as the last time that they went out there. So it was very frustrating for the guys in the field when it came to that. So it's a very, I don't know, it's a tough balancing act for me, as to how detail and like must do it this way type of things versus allowing them some creativity when it comes to that. But whenever you're creating the process, you can be lazy, I guess is the best way to say it. If you don't do it, if you're not very specific about things, you can like leave things open ended and say that you're allowing it for creativity, and in reality, it's like you just don't want to figure it out, and you're just being lazy when it comes to it. And I've been guilty of that too.
I think we all have. We're busy, and it's easier just to move on to something else, and squirrel,
Yeah.
off you go,
Oh yeah.
running on to something else.
100%, 100%. And one of the programs that I will share, and I don't get any kind of kickbacks or anything for this, but one of the programs that I've found is very useful when it comes to this is Trainual. And there are other programs that are similar to Trainual out there, but Trainual is a very good program to use, that you can constantly go back to and see like the processes and procedures. And as the owner or manager, you can see how far someone's gone through the process of and watch the videos and taken the test, how many times they took the test in order to get it right, and all this other stuff. You can make it 100% pass in order for you to pass, like you have to get 100% correct, or you can make it like a 60% pass fail rate. So there's a lot of adjustability there when it comes to that. And that's one of those programs where you can, it comes to like more automation when you're doing onboarding, that it's like, all right, you sit down and you're going to watch these videos, and this is our way of doing things. And then at the end of the video, you take a test, and it's like, all right, in this video, it said that the business was founded in X, Y, and Z date. What was that date? So it's not just the typical questions to ask. It's like off the wall questions, make sure they pay attention throughout the whole training video type thing. But there's several of them out there that you can use, but I found Trainual is pretty easy to use.
That sounds like a very wonderful little thing to have in your back pocket.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you a question that I've been asking pretty much everybody on the show.
Mhm.
What is the most unusual profit leak that you've seen so far in a business? Or a
Ooh.
hidden one that isn't right up there that everybody else would be thinking about?
Well, I don't know. People probably think about it a lot, but don't really, maybe not do something about it as often. I guess go into supply houses and allowing technicians to go to supply houses on a whim, and then not having those prices correctly in your price book, because the price book is such a royal pain to update so often. And used to, back in the day, you set prices and they were your prices for the year. And now with changing in prices, inflation, and all that good jazz, supply houses and vendors are changing prices constantly on you. And if you don't change it in your price book, then you could be pricing yourself out of business without even realizing it, and you're just losing money. Like the cash is just going, and you don't even realize it because of it's just, it can be a crazy different number. And there's a lot. I mean, like I have 7,000 task codes in my price book. To just think about going through all those task items and saying, okay, are these prices correct? That's overwhelming. Like that's extremely overwhelming. So the fact that you might have to do that once a quarter or once a month, like that's a full-time job in itself. But there were times where I had like systems that I hadn't updated in a year, and I was $3,000 off on the cost on the materials. And it just blew my mind whenever I just randomly went through. I was like, you know what? I have a gut feeling that there's some pricing that's off here. And we found the worst one was almost $3,000 off, and wasn't one that we ever used, thankfully, but I still found it to be that far off. If we did use it, oof, that would have hurt.
I remember when one of my coaching members was on a call, and he was kind of upset that day. I could see that he was not happy. And he said, I just went through and I decided to do some spot checking on my vendor pricing. And I found out that vendor A has been charging 4 times as much as vendor B. And I didn't have that higher price in my price book. I was still at the lower price. And he says, I am so mad at myself. I just placed this big old order. And he goes, and now to realize that we've lost money on the material side of this big job that they were doing.
Yeah.
He said, I'm just sick. I'm just mad at myself. And he was just in a real funk over it until we were able to tear the job apart and see where there were some places that he could come up with some additional savings to offset some of that, because it was too late. That happened to be a big job that they had bid on. So he really couldn't go back and change his pricing. But
we bid on a job at the beginning of 2020. It was actually I'd say the beginning of 2020, the end of 2021. And the job actually started, 2020 at the end of 2019. So it was pre COVID and all that stuff. Then the job actually started in 2021. And so like it was a whole year later when the job started, and they were trying their best to hold me at those prices. And it was our cost on the job was right at $200,000 in just materials. And by the time it was all said and done, our cost on the job was just shy of $300,000 on materials. So I would have had to eat $100,000 in material cost just from that one project. And like at that time, no, we just started, like I said, we had just started Service Emperor in 2020. So we were a brand new company at that point. And so there's no way I could have absorbed $100,000 in material cost. And then the labor, because our labor was more also by the time, because there was a labor shortage because everybody was not working, because you could stay home and not have to work and get a check. And so it was just a challenging time. Thankfully, we went back and had conversations with them and said, look, we're not going to, shoot these numbers way up, but we got to have some sort of leniency here. We have to, because these are our real numbers coming into the year now that everything's changed and there's supply shortage of everything. And so they were more than happy to work with us, especially since we showed them the numbers and they didn't think that we were just inflating numbers just because everybody else was inflating numbers.
That's an area that people get caught in all the time, is those changing prices, especially these last few years. When just because you bought it for that price yesterday doesn't mean you get it for that price next week.
Yeah. Job costing every single job is so important. And I say that all the time, and I don't do it all the time. But you should really be job costing every single job that you do, even the smallest of jobs. And you'll see where your cash is going. You'll realize that you collected $200 on that little service call, but you actually lost $35 because it cost you $235 to pull up in the driveway, you know.
Right.
And there's a lot of times people don't realize, they don't understand the cost of pulling into somebody's driveway. Technicians are the absolute worst on that, and they really need to. You need to. I don't know 100% without a shadow of a doubt the best way to teach a technician this. We do like the one truck exercise. I don't know if you're familiar with that, where we go basically give this technician a sheet of paper, and it goes through the cost of goods sold, like everything that you would do for a business, and they just guesstimate like what would your Yelp ads be for the year, what would your Google My Business, your PPC, your van cost, your wrap cost, like what's all this stuff cost you throughout the year for one van. And typically they're more expensive. Their numbers are probably double what they actually are for a business. But then they come back and say, wow, okay, I understand now why we have to charge what we charge to get to the person's house and to collect. And I think that's probably the only way that I've had the conversation and them understand. Otherwise, they just take it on face value that, hey, it costs $245 to pull in somebody's driveway based on marketing spend and all this other stuff. Obviously, we want to get those numbers down, but that's where it's at right now. And so if you collect anything less than $245, we basically paid that customer to pull into their driveway. And the first time I told someone that, they were like, no, because I collected $95 and I only got paid, $35. So if I'm doing the math correctly, that means you made the rest of that money. I was like, no,
Yeah.
sir.
You
That's not how
greedy
that works.
business owner made the rest
Yeah,
of that
that's,
money.
and I was like, no, nope. At that point, I just paid them $200 to show up, for you to show up, or $180 or whatever it is. And so for a while, I was getting a very baffled look for my technicians until we did the one truck exercise. But then it had to have been something else, and I don't recall right off the top of my head that I did that kind of got them to truly understand that it costs way more than just your salary to pull up in someone's driveway. And diagnostic onlys, those just murder cash flow. You might have cash at the end of the day. You might have ran 5 calls and you collected $95 for all 5 of those calls, and you were finished by lunchtime. And so I only had to pay you for 4 hours at $35 an hour. So you think that we're good as a business? No, no, because we still have overhead expenses that we have to pay for. And I think opening the books to the technicians, so they don't understand the books. Heck, I don't understand half the books. Like there's stuff in there that I don't get. And so and me trying to explain things that I don't understand, like I don't even try. I'm like, look, I don't understand this, so I'm going to bring somebody else in to explain this information to you. But being willing to share all of the information with them, I think that gives them enough buy-in to where they're like, okay, I trust whatever it is you got to say. I trust it.
So they can see that it's founded in reality and just not some made up number. I need to take your salary and multiply it times 4, and that's what it costs us to come here.
Right.
Like,
Right.
they see it's based on something of substance, because they have no idea what we pay for things.
100% true. And just like our CRMs, most of them, like I had a manager who was, he was very high up in knowing most of the numbers. But as soon as I told him how much we paid for the CRM, he was like flabbergasted. He's like, you paid that much for a CRM? Like that blows my mind. I was like, it blows my mind too, every month when I have to pay it. It's ridiculous. But yeah, that's what it is. And so then there's this aha moment that goes off in their head. They're like, okay, I understand why we got to hustle. We got to make sure that, we need to cover the $90,000 that it costs in overhead every month. And so that's one of the things with operating the business remotely is there's, that $2,500, $5,000 a month that we don't spend on a warehouse. So that money can go back towards technicians and learning and stuff like that. That's one of the things that I've always said, because it's awkward sometimes whenever you're talking to people as a technician, they're like, where's your shop? We don't have a shop. Well, that's weird. And so then it's easier for them to have a conversation with someone else about it, because they know that that money's going back to them, as an employee, versus us spending it on something that I consider a vanity purchase, because in reality we don't need a warehouse. It's just it's a building to put my name and information on, and for me to have to go to every day. So for them, it becomes a badge of honor for them instead of it being something awkward. And, we have like mini storage units around. So each person has their little mini warehouse.
Okay.
And so, but that doesn't add up to the total amount it would cost for a warehouse. Those things are getting expensive. Their prices are being a little bit ridiculous right now with everything, but it's still not like having a warehouse that we have to pay, $5,000 a month for.
Well, Trish, thank you so much for sharing this. You've opened my eyes on some, quite a few things that I hadn't really thought about. And I work with these guys all the time. They're always teaching me something new.
Very outside the box. If it's normal, I do the exact opposite.
Yes. Yes. And I try my hardest to be that same way too. If all the other accounts are going left, I'm going right.
Right.
Who wants to be in with the herd?
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you again for coming on our show. And if our listeners want to hop on your Service Business Mastery podcast or learn a little bit more about Tersh himself, where would you like them to go?
Servicebusinessmastery.com. That's our website. Any of the podcast catchers, we're on there, Service Business Mastery. And you can email me at podcasts@servicebusinessmastery.com. And I'm more than happy to help in any way that I can, share my knowledge with anybody that has any questions about it.
Well, thank you again, Tersh. It's been amazing to get to learn something new from somebody who I consider as one of the masters out there. So
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, thank you so much.